1875, Thomas Paine wrote a pamphlet stating that the freedoms of man can only be maintained by limiting the power of government. The pamphlet was called Common Sense, and today it still is Common Sense. Your hosts, Representative Patricia Morgan, Luis Vargas, and Elizabeth Smith with the news, special guest Mike Riley, brought to you by the Rhode Island Republicans, and now with the news from a different perspective.
Hi, I'm Luis Vargas.
And I'm Elizabeth Smith.
And together, we're reporting for Common Sense. First, I wanted to extend a warm welcome to our newest addition here at Common Sense, Elizabeth Smith, who will be helping us to deliver the most up-to-date news. She has been active in Republican politics all of her life, and most recently was volunteer coordinator for the Fung for Governor campaign. Welcome, Liz.
Thank you, Louis. I look forward to sharing this news desk. In the latest news on the pension battle, the Providence Journal reported more than 24 attorneys representing both sides of the state pension lawsuit were in Superior Court, showing for the first time their legal hands in motions for summary judgment in the case. During the hearing, John Tarantino, arguing for the state, made a point of emphasizing that the state legislature removed language from the statute in 1980 that said retirees would receive a cost of living adjustment for life. He said withdrawal of that language showed that COLAs are not part of retirement benefits for that state retirees receive. But a lawyer representing retirees, Carly Iafrate, said the idea that COLAs and retirement benefits are not one and the same is absurd. She said lawmakers every year plan to provide retirement benefits and COLAs to retirees as part of every actuarial report.
And if that wasn't complicated enough, both sides are trying to settle the case entirely outside of court. And last week, Rhode Island's largest union voted to approve a pension settlement. After a week of voting, the status of a proposed pretrial settlement over the legal fight of Rhode Island's pension overhaul remains uncertain. But the largest state employees union, Council 94, American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, has approved the deal.
In the latest news in the General Assembly, the Providence Journal is reporting that anti-smoking advocates turned out at the State House last week to testify in support of a bill that would make Rhode Island the first state in the nation to raise the legal age for tobacco purchases to 21. They also spoke in favor of two other bills, one that would regulate hookah bars and the other that would require liquids made for e-cigarettes to be packaged in child-proof containers. Although a handful of municipalities, including New York City and many communities in Massachusetts, have raised the legal age for tobacco to 21, no state has done so. In a few states, the legal age is 19. Tobacco control advocates seek the higher age to prevent young people from becoming addicted to nicotine products and driving up the nation's health care costs. Representative Teresa Tanzi of Narragansett and South Kingstown is the bill's sponsor. She said that studies have shown that smoking rates among those 18 to 21 have fallen dramatically in communities that raise the legal age.
Nearly a dozen people opposed the bill, however. They include convenience store owners who said their businesses would be hurt by the loss of sales, and by customers going over to state lines not only to buy cigarettes, but also other items such as lottery tickets and milk. Purveyors of the smokeless nicotine products said their businesses too would be adversely affected. And they added that people under 21 who use e-cigarettes to quit smoking would no longer be able to do so. Quite a few remarked that after turning 18, people should have the right to make their own decisions, especially if they are old enough to go to vote and to go to war. And unlike alcohol, smoking doesn't put other lives at risk, only their own, they said.
Now, usually, we would make our way to the State House, but this week we'll be showing you some action from the most recent Republican State Central Committee. Take a look. This week, Common Sense visited the Rhode Island Republican Party State Central Committee meeting. The committee met to elect a new slate of officers at the Shriners Imperial Room in Cranston. Outgoing Chairman Mark Smiley started the evening with this.
Tonight, we turn the page.
The winners were James Jaquette, Treasurer, William Ritchie, Secretary, Dave Talon, Second Vice Chairman, Russ Herzen, First Vice Chairman, and Brandon Bell will be the Republican Party's new chairman. Chairman Smiley took a moment to state the mission of the Rhode Island Republican State Central Committee.
My understanding, the mission of this committee is exactly that, is to gain General Assembly seats. The Republican National Committee is in charge of getting presidents elected. There are committees that get congressmen elected and senators elected. Our job here is to gain General Assembly seats.
If you are interested in learning more about the Rhode Island Republican State Central Committee, the governing body of the Rhode Island Republican Party, you can reach them via email at contact@rigop.org or by calling 401-732-8282. Congratulations to all the new Rhode Island GOP officers from everyone here at Common Sense.
Rhode Island Taxpayers releases a daily newsletter, and last week they published some questions made by the Ocean State Tea Party in action. Specifically, they asked the governor why she was not dusting off Ken Block's report on fraud, waste, and abuse in Rhode Island's welfare systems. And they followed up with why she was not addressing the cost of state government employees beyond the pittance of the $22 million that she expected to save from the ever-elusive efficiency gains in her budget. Putting us on a legislative alert, they said that our state government was opening new doors for taxation, but not for spending cuts. That's what the new state property does, they said.
The Ocean State Tea Party in action went on further to say that it dovetails right into the regional plan for sustainable development known as Roadmap Rhode Island. Does anyone really believe that this tax will only be on second homes over $1 million for very long? Once this door is open, you know the state will run through to see what it can find. Little by little, they said, the state property tax will be assessed on more and more homes, and for reasons that are as egregious as looking for ways to fill a bloated, unbalanced budget to solidifying state authority over local control. Before you know what happened, you'll be left with little rate course and less money in your pocket.
In the latest news on the special election in House District 33, which includes South Kingstown and Narragansett, last week was the filing deadline, and here is the breakdown. There are 4 Democrats that filed for the seat, including newcomers, town council members, and even the sister of Congressman David Cicilline, 2 independents, and 1 Republican named Bob Traeger. The primary date is May 5th, and the general election is shortly thereafter.
That's it for the news this week. Now let's join our host, Representative Patricia Morgan, as we meet this week's special guest, Mike Riley, to talk about the dire situation of the Rhode Island pension system.
Hello, welcome to Common Sense. This is a program where we try to make sense out of the policies that affect your life.
Join us this week and every week where we discuss the issues of the day with the people who know the details behind them. Policy experts, business leaders, town councilors, and state legislators. We catch you up on the news from a different perspective. We check in with Jeff Richard and hear what he's thinking about. And where we always are willing to ask, are you kidding me? So join us each week at Verizon Channel 34 or Cox 15, Saturdays at 4 p.m. and Sundays at 10 a.m. Be sure to like us on Facebook at Common Sense and follow us at Twitter at Common Sense RI. Brought to you by the Rhode Island Republican Party.
Are you kidding me? Raise the waitress minimum wage by 400%? Who's supposed to pay for that? Senate Bill 291, sponsored by Senators Golden, Lynch, Conley, Coyne, and Chacon. Don't try to get away from all these unjustified cost increases by going out with your spouse for a night on the town. Senate Bill 291 schedules increases in the sub-minimum wage for employees who are also customarily tipped for the service. Today, that minimum compensation stands at $2.89 an hour. Under this bill, it catches up with the state minimum wage in 2020. That's a little more than a 400% increase in the cost borne by bars and restaurants just to have waitstaff at your table. What's that going to do to the price of a burger and a beer, let alone the price of a lobster and Chardonnay? A better question might be, what is this going to do to the profitability of businesses that run today on a 10 to 12% margin? The answer for many of them is, let's go out of business. This bill is intended to help. Is this bill intended to help workers increase their income? Well, that might be true, but no one will be able to afford to go out to eat anymore. Less jobs and more pandering. So the next time you pay $22 for a grilled cheese sandwich, you'll know why. Are you kidding me?
Hello, welcome to Common Sense, which is a program where we try to make sense out of the policies that affect your life and come up with common sense solutions. I'm Representative Patricia Morgan, and today as my guest I have Michael Riley. Mike was congressional, he ran in congressional district. He ran for Congress in the 2nd Congressional District, and he's also an investment advisor. He has his office down in South County, and he has 2 companies, Coastal Management Group and Beach Street Financial Services, as opposed to Wall Street Financial Services. Welcome, Mike, and thank you for coming.
It's a pleasure to be here.
You have a regular column in Go Local Prov where you talk about financial matters that are affecting our cities and towns. That comes out every Tuesday.
Yes.
Yeah, I've read it. I'm a financial advisor too. I think
Okay.
you know that. I don't think I'm at quite the level that you are when you talk. You get into such detail, but I've always found it very, very informative and scary at the same time. Some of the things that you are talking about in those columns, and I really recommend anybody to go on Go Local Prov, especially on Tuesday, and find Mike's column because these are things that everybody should know about because it affects your pocketbook. But why don't you tell me a little bit about you and how you got to be a financial advisor and how you got involved in looking at our pension plans?
Okay. Well, so I am a 35-year veteran of Wall Street. I traded for myself. I traded for companies. What I was a trader. I wasn't a financial advisor on Wall Street. I was a person who was paid on whether I made money or not. That as opposed to a broker who makes a recommendation and gets a commission. I never had a commission in my life. That's changing now. So in any case, I spent 35 years in the financial field. And as a result of the World Trade Center accident, I moved my family out of the New York City area and I moved to Rhode Island. And after a couple of years, I decided I was going to start up an investment advisory called Coastal Management Group that could utilize my skills to provide investment advice. And I was trading in pretty sophisticated instruments. So I decided institutional would be where I would give my advice.
So New York City's loss and Rhode Island's gain, I guess.
I guess so. I don't know that I was really providing too much to New York City.
Well, you know that 9/11 was a tough thing. I'm glad you came up here, and I'm glad you're staying and giving us the benefit of all the things you've learned over the last 35 years.
I love Rhode Island. I want my kids to grow up here. It's great, but what I have found through even taking even more education, I have multiple years of education, advanced education. But when I decided I was going to investigate what I thought was going wrong in my particular town with regard to pension funding and that sort of thing, everyone seemed oblivious. They don't understand it, even the people who are running it. And so I decided, I got to figure out what's going on. What are the incentives for this to happen? And, so when I found out that there was, there's probably some shady stuff going on, I wanted to expose it.
Well, shady stuff. There are pension plans all over Rhode Island that are in trouble.
Yes.
And there are people that are running them, as you say, that don't have your qualifications, I think.
Yeah.
And they just simply don't understand why they're in such bad shape. A lot of them don't care.
Yeah.
Because they say, well, we'll just keep taxing.
Yeah.
We'll just keep getting more money in and we'll just keep propping them up.
Yeah.
Rather than solving the problem and making them sustainable and
Yeah.
affordable for the future.
Unfortunately, there are many towns in Rhode Island that are past the point of saving.
I'm afraid so. I mean, and I don't have your qualifications,
Yeah.
but I've looked at them well enough to know that when you have a pension plan that is 9 or 10% funded, there's just no way to come back.
Yeah,
right?
mathematically it's
even if
impossible.
you made 100% return, and what's the chance of making 100% return?
It's never
in 1 year.
It's never happened in the large index stock markets ever since the Buttonwood Tree in 1792.
Right. I mean, you make 100%
Yeah.
normally over a period of about 10 years or something, 10, 12 years, not over 1 or 2. So if you go from 9 and you make 100%, you're only at 18.
Right, exactly. That's the point.
Right? You're
Yeah,
still
yeah.
poorly funded.
Right. So that discount rate, the funded and the discount rate, the assumption of returns, is an assumption out 30 years you're going to compound that return. It's not what you're going to earn next year.
Okay, there you go into that highfalutin language again.
Okay.
So why don't you try to explain to our viewers discount rate? What does that mean?
Okay, so there has to be an assumption made on if you properly fund some future obligation as to how you're going to compound your returns and how those liabilities are also compounding. So, for example, if you're going to owe $70,000 to every employee in XYZ town, let's pick a town, and you put up no money to pay those people in the future, when those people come to their retirement, the town will have no money to pay the $70,000.
Okay.
Right? So you have to put up a certain amount of money to
Have the 70,000,
And
but
so-
not for the first year, for the second, third, fourth, fifth, 20th.
and then you get into
25th.
actuarial science. How long is the average employee going to live? Some won't even make it to retirement. Some will make it 30 years into retirement. So, and the
Which we want them to. We want people.
God bless them. We
That's
want them
right.
to. But the reality is that there's a demographic shift going on with this underfunding that says
We're
people are
living
living longer. Yeah. And so for a long time, we weren't putting up enough money to meet those assumptions, to meet the assumption that people are living longer. We were always assuming if they make it to 80, great. Now the number's more like 84, 85. If you get to retirement, and you're male or female, you're both expected to be 83 to 85 by most mortality tables. So mortality is taken into account, and interest rates is the biggest thing.
I know you're getting pretty complicated here,
Yeah.
but I guess what you're saying is that we're living longer.
Yeah,
So the money that towns and cities put in, thinking that people would be dying in their 70s, well, they're not. They're
Right.
living another 10 or 15 years.
Yeah.
So the money that they put in isn't adequate.
right.
And on top of that, because cities and towns are trying to keep the tax rate down, and they still have to, repair their buildings and the roads and sidewalks and fund all kinds of, different water projects or sewer projects, they haven't been putting the full amount in. And that's
Almost.
the discount rate, what they should have been putting in?
The discount rate is the actual physical dollars that they put in. The discount rate is how we're calculating how much that will
How
be in the
much
future.
that is.
Okay.
Okay.
And so there's,
And so there's a real complicated formula
Yes.
based on how
Yes.
long people live and stuff.
but the notion is simple. If you promise somebody you're going to pay them out in time something, you got to put money away to fund that promise.
Right.
Right. You can't just promise them it and then turn around and give the same people a raise and not put money away.
Well, you go to the public policy part of that.
Yeah.
I think part of the problem is they've been making contracts and saying, sure, we'll give you that, without studying what does that mean in 10 years, in 15 years, in 20 years. They've just been saying, well, it feels good to us. Why don't we give you that?
So
and not realizing what the impact on budgets, on people's budgets,
yeah.
on their homeowners is going to be.
So the unfundedness of Rhode Island is a combination of two things. One, it's to every elected official's benefit to be as nice as possible, to be Santa Claus, and negotiate nice raises for everybody and pretend like they have the funding to do that. They don't. I don't know a town that has that. Okay? So what they have to do is combine the idea of being strong on what proper benefit raises are and strong on how they're currently funding it.
All right, and that requires a lot more than they've been doing, I think. So at any rate,
So the
listen,
politics are trying to get reelected.
the politics are about being elected,
Yeah.
right? But they're not managers, and they're not actually getting in the expert advice when they're signing these contracts.
They often
to
don't
say,
want it.
Well, perhaps. Anyway, we'll come right back and we'll continue this discussion.
Are you kidding me? Automatic raises to the minimum wage? Senate Bill 272, sponsored by Senators Raptakis, McCaffrey, Ciccone, Lombardi, and Archibald, is continuing with the theme of our senators driving up business costs, with the inevitable result of driving down business activity. We come to Senate Bill 272. This legislation is a real twofer. It reaffirms the hard dollar increase in our minimum wage through this year, and indexes that number to the Consumer Price Index going forward. Now here's the deal. Raising the minimum wage is politically difficult because economists and business owners alike recognize that it is a forced increase in overhead expense that is not compensated by any increases in productivity. So those constituencies yell whenever it happens. On the other hand, politicians love to toss a bone to the voters so they can take the heat, ignoring the resulting decrease in jobs. It gives them a chance to tout what they've been trying to move forward towards, a living wage. Problem is, no one can live on minimum wage, and it was never intended to be a career salary. They've now indexed the minimum wage so it will go up on its own, without the messy need to constantly reintroduce contentious legislation. Now, raising the minimum wage raises prices, which raises the consumer price index, which raises the minimum wage, which raises the consumer price index, and around it goes. Problem solved for the politicians, problem made worse for you and me. Are you kidding me?
All right, we're back, and we're going to continue our discussion about pensions. And I'm going to have to warn you to keep it so that myself and the viewers can understand what we're talking about. But we were talking about discount rate, which is kind of the rate at which we have to put money in the plan so that we have it later when people retire. But there's another part of that, which is the rate of return on investments, right? And I mean, what can you tell me about that? You've looked, I think, at a lot of pension plans around the state, and you've looked at what they are assuming is going to be the rate of return. What are some of your conclusions on that?
So if you look across the nation, for example, economists like me or financial advisors like me are always saying whatever discount rate they have right now, it's too high. And the reason we're saying it is because the underlying measure of interest rates is the overall yield curve. And the United States has a zero interest rate policy now. They didn't have that 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So investments in general return a lot less.
Right. And any retiree who put some savings away thinking that they were going to put money into CDs or in a savings account and they were going to live off the interest understands that.
Right.
I can remember during Jimmy Carter's time, we could put money in the bank and we were making 12% on a CD, which was incredibly good. Of course, the inflation rate was higher, but it was good to have that money coming in. Right now, our senior citizens who have a little pool of money thinking they were going to live off, they're making nothing.
Right. And I think an analogous thing to look at is if you're a family and you have kids that are thinking about college, and you're told you need to put away X dollars now to achieve the tuition rate, sophomore, freshman, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. Those are all assuming rates of return on your money, right? Okay. So if you have a lower assumed rate of return, then you have to put up more money each year and more money now to achieve those goals.
Sure. If you say you're going to make 15% a year on your money.
Yeah.
Well,
you're not
probably not realistic, but then you don't have to put quite as much in to reach the freshman year of college.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's funny because the state in their college bound fund, for example, 529, they're not telling you you're going to make 7.5% a year, but the state is saying it in their pension plan.
Right.
So one of them is wrong.
Well, and 7.5% is really hard. I mean, there might be people who are invested in their 401ks and they're saying, well, geez, last year or the year before I made 10%, 12%. It's much harder when you're in a pension plan because a good chunk of that money has to stay in cash. Yeah, and cash is making zero.
Right. The only people that really at this point that can make 10% going forward have to be exposed to equities.
Right. All in stocks, too.
Right.
All in stocks.
Which is a very historically risky thing to do. Because you could have a 2008, you could have a 2001. I think people remember
2008 and 2009.
Right.
Yeah.
And the fragileness of both the state and many of the cities, most notably Providence, but Johnston and others come out there, they're not in condition to take a hit. They cannot take a hit because then they get to that point of no return.
Well, and many of them already are at point of no return.
Some of the smaller ones
we'll talk about that later, but yeah, they've assumed that they're going to make 8.25%,
which is outrageous.
In Providence, it's outrageous. You can't make that. Again, at least 20% of the money has to be in cash because they're sending out checks every month, right?
The guys who manage the fund and who actually have done fairly well, it's the same guy that Buddy Cianci hired, by the way, in 1995. That's another subject, but they've actually done fairly well over the years, and that included two of the biggest bull markets in history. They haven't achieved even 7.5%, much less 8.25%.
Oh, the actual performance is not 8.25%.
No, it's way less. And so what are they basing this 8.25% on? And my suspicion.
Wishful thinking.
No, because everyone there knows. It's like to me, it's almost criminal. But everyone there knows that the higher the discount rate they choose, the less money they have to put up now.
In the pension plan.
Right. If they had to put up more money now, then they'd have to cut other services or raise taxes. Those are the only two things. And no politician wants to do that. No finance director wants to do that. Providence has no choice. They have no choice. They have to put up more money.
And they don't have it.
That's correct.
They just don't have it. They have the second highest commercial rate
They've
in the country.
They've maxed out their taxes.
They don't have it.
It's not. They can't even sell assets because I suspect the value of the assets that are on their book now are overstated.
Okay, well, that's another program, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard some of my colleagues when Governor, then Treasurer Raimondo, changed the rate of return on the state pension plan down to 7.5%, which is even aggressive, right?
The easiest thing for me to just Google Warren Buffett. What should the discount rate be? What does he use? 6.
6. So we're still, even at 7.5%, we're above what is reasonable.
It's outrageous.
It's not reasonable to think you can grow your money at 7.5% year over year over year.
Right. But
especially since part of it is in cash, which right now is earning 0.
Right.
And the other part, you can't get too risky with it.
Right.
Because you can't be in the stock market fully invested.
Right.
You could have a 2008 again.
Right. So to plan going forward, you have to put more money in to fund your obligations. And unfortunately, we're still dealing with obligations that are 10, 15, 20 years old, past generations. People my age have had the benefit of those services and what was paid to the city. The next generation is going to still have to be paying for what I got. And I think that's just completely immoral. And it's unethical, it's wrong, and I want to bring notice to that.
Yeah. Let's just talk a little bit more about the rate of return. So Warren Buffett, who's the preeminent investor out there, everybody likes to quote him, he says it should be more like 6. Mm-hmm. Have you figured out, let's just take the state, have you figured out how much extra money we would have to be putting in if it was at 6?
Yes, I have, and I have a spreadsheet that shows it, that would show the numbers. I just don't have it here to display right now, but I understand that we can do that through the magic of television, that we can actually do that. So I'll submit a spreadsheet, but it's billions to the state, and even to the city of Providence, it approaches $1 billion to change it to 6%.
To 6, yeah. Which is the reasonable amount to say you can grow it.
$1 billion more in unfunded liability.
All right.
So right now,
which is why we don't bring it down to 6. We'd rather kind of pretend the problem doesn't exist.
But the liability is the liability. The liability is actually paying everybody $70,000. So whether we call it 8 now or 6 now,
we're still doing it in reality.
We're still doing it, right? So the question is whether we're being prudent about funding it, and are we handing out raises at the same time we can't actually fund the raises we already handed out? That's my question, and my answer is yes. We're giving out raises now when we can't even fund what we already did.
Because then the raises also increase the liability
and compound,
as well.
Yes.
Right, and at some point, we will talk about the viability of these pension plans in the next segment. But I know that a lot of I heard from a lot of folks when we were doing the pension reform at the state level, and they said, well, lowering that rate of return down was artificially making a condition where we have to act, right? It was making the crisis. That by doing that, we manufactured a crisis. I wanted to say, well, why don't we just make the rate of return 20%?
Exactly.
Then we don't have to put anything.
Then you have no problem at all.
Why don't we make it 50%? We don't have to put any money at all in the pension plan.
There's something really scary about that, because there is someone who wrote quite a bit about how it was ridiculous to lower the discount rate. I still think, and any economist, anybody that understands finance, thinks it's way too high still, including Warren Buffett. We have the policy director hired by our current treasurer, Seth Magaziner, is Tom Seguros. He doesn't believe that the discount rate should be below 10, let's say. This guy is actually the policy guy for the state of Rhode Island treasurer. We're setting up for a complete disaster.
Okay, well on that, we'll take a break while I take my breath. We'll be right back.
What do I stand for? What do I stand for? Most nights I don't know anymore.
Are you kidding me? Raise the amount received on workman's comp. That's just another hidden tax on business. Senate Bill 277, sponsored by Senators Doyle and Ciccone. Here's a real sneaky increase in the cost of doing business in the Ocean State, as it always comes wrapped in claims of a benefit for the average voter. By state mandate, S277 seeks to increase the weekly amount received in workman's compensation by those injured on the job. Trouble is, those payments are coming from insurance policies paid for by employers, who can now look forward to increases in their premiums for those policies. So while Doyle and Ciccone crow proudly about how their bill is revenue neutral, you and I are supposed to ignore the fact that our employers' profit margins just took another hit, courtesy of the General Assembly. Now obviously no one wants to eliminate workman's comp. We'd like to see some figures as to what a 10% increase will really do to rehab those seriously injured. Remember, when we subsidize something, we can expect to get more of it. Get ready for the business stampede of both businesses leaving and laid off employees limping, because the money is better than unemployment compensation. Are you kidding me?
Welcome back. I'm Representative Patricia Morgan, and I'm sitting here with Mike Riley, who's an investment advisor with extensive experience in the financial field. And he has been studying for a couple of years now the pension plans in our state and the problems that are there that are kind of being hidden from citizens. Right or wrong, the actual problems that are out there aren't being discussed very much. And they're being papered over with unrealistic discount rates of returns. But there's some real nasty stuff out there for taxpayers.
Well, every taxpayer works on his own to maintain his own family finances and works very hard for his income and doesn't want to see a giant tax bill coming because his local government or his state government didn't properly handle their financial affairs. Well, that's exactly the situation we're headed for. And in some cases, the amount of burden on the average family in some of these cities and towns is more than they make in a year.
Well, let me just. We had talked about Central Falls. Central Falls was the first city that kind of was the canary in the coal mine, right?
Yeah.
They just couldn't make their obligations anymore. They couldn't pay the salaries. They couldn't do anything with their roads. They couldn't do anything.
Right.
So they actually went to Chapter 9 bankruptcy. One of the first things the receiver did was give every person who owned property in Central Falls a 20% tax increase. Boom, just like that. I know in Woonsocket, which also, now we're under a different set of rules, the Financial Stability Act was enacted to keep municipalities from going through the restructuring that federal court allowed them. But up in Woonsocket, they have had a maximum tax increase every year, the folks have, and they had a special tax increase of, I think it was 16%.
Yeah.
So over the last 3 years, they've gotten another 28% tax increase. So these pension plans are creating a lot of strain on homeowners, on taxpayers.
And will, yes.
And will going forward. I think there's 12 municipalities that are considered in danger.
Yeah, we have a designation, I believe it was also brought out in that pension reform law in that time period, that below 60% funded in a pension plan is considered critical status. And for the last 3 years, we had a commission that was formed out of that same law that was supposed to study the critical status towns and get them up to speed and force them to have a plan.
Well, at least force them to look at the numbers and acknowledge they have a problem and see what they can do to help their towns and their taxpayers.
And my problem with that is they were already required to do that by law. And so it's like,
And they weren't
it's like,
doing it?
yeah.
Or they were just,
They just,
oh, it's too ugly, don't let me.
I'm not gonna do it.
Yeah.
We're gonna save money on an actuarial study this year for 30,000. Why do we need to know exactly how much we're in debt? So, the decisions like that have been made, and people just don't pay attention, and frankly, the public hasn't called for them to do it. So, I think it's because they don't know what's about to hit them. And when
Yeah,
they
I
first
don't
get
think they
hit,
do either.
that's when they start to cry. It's gonna be too late, believe me.
Well, and you're so knowledgeable that you get it, but boiling it down so people understand it is really hard. And it's not until there are Central Falls with a 20% tax increase, or Woonsocket with a 28% tax increase, that they go, oh my God, what has been happening to us, right?
But that isn't the only financial harm they face. Yes, I'm going to face future taxes, and probably in the form of property taxes. Well, what do you think happens to the value of your home when a property tax goes up? So you're going to lose the equity in your home, probably.
Because nobody wants to
No
buy
one
your
wants
home
to
if they're
buy.
going to pay an
This
enormous
is a
tax bill.
potential big problem, and citizens should be talking to their current governments and saying, what is the status of are you funding it? Because there's no way any town or municipality should be giving out raises when they can't even fund what they've already promised.
And we're talking about the cities and towns that run their own pension plans. They're not in the state plan.
Right.
We actually did do pension reform in the state plan.
Yep.
That was, was heated,
Balanced.
getting it done, but,
Okay, but it's not-
trying to make it sustainable.
Well, and even with that, even with what we did, which is still being challenged and is in
That's
court,
right, it's still in court.
much of the savings came from an amortization. It came from kicking the can officially, pushing out the years that we were amortizing as a state the debt. So that's not fully recognized. One of the things that will happen when we unwind this whole thing will be a question of whether we go back to the previous amortization. I don't think we will. I think we're going to get away with keeping the amortization years where it is. So you will still have had that lagging effect that pushed out the debt a few years
Yes.
and kicked the can. But all the other things could spell, I'm guessing, 3 to 5 billion more in liability if we unwind what's current.
Well, and if we actually go down to 6% rather than 7.5%, if we unwind
Another
that.
few billion. And
Yeah.
the unwind also sends back to the cities and towns more burden as cities and towns, because what the state did was take some of the burden off of them, because they're paying for a large portion.
Yeah, one of the things that I was, I'm a financial advisor again, and I have set up 401ks for private companies, and generally speaking, an employer will match an employee up to 6%.
Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah.
if they put in 3%,
Yeah.
so will the employer. That kind of limits the exposure to the employer. One of the things that was in our pension reform was that cities and towns are still matching at 24%. So that means that 24% of salary is going into a pension plan, which is a really high level of funding.
Right. So effectively, they're doing that. It's also a catch-up mechanism. But because they're behind on their funding schedules, the cities and town, the particular union, whether it's a teacher, a fire, or whatever, they have a contracted rate of contribution. It might be 9.5%, it might be 10, it might be 7, depending on the town and the entity. The city would basically float up or down depending on how the tax revenue came in versus the cost of running a city. So, by and large, over the last many years, the city's portion of contribution has been going up and up,
Up and
and
up.
up. But that's even including the fact that on the side, they're not paying the future obligations. So those future obligations are going up
That's
and
just
up
that's
and
just
up.
paying today.
Yeah, that's today.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a landslide coming against the next generation, and there's probably a landslide for towns like Providence coming in the next few years, and some towns might even not make it the next few years. So
Well, I know there are some. There's one of my towns has a pension plan that is 11% funded.
yeah, it can't
Yeah,
survive.
I don't know how it survives. And they need experts like you in there.
But you know what? I'm gonna
helping
walk-
them. But even
Yeah.
so, what do you do when
Yeah.
it's 11% funded?
Well-
Can you tell me how well funded Providence is?
I have it currently, first of all, there's an asset side of the equation and there's a liability side. So I think Providence is dramatically understating their liability through the the use of a high discount rate.
Okay.
I think there's a couple other things they're doing that are understating the liability. On the asset side, they are overstating their assets, and I see that nowhere else in the nation.
So they're saying they have money that they don't have.
Yeah.
And they say that it's growing at a rate that couldn't possibly be
That's
happening.
correct. They have approximately $58 million that was cited in January of 2014 by their auditor as improper accounting for pension assets. Now, I cited this in 2013.
What, they put the mayor's wallet in there, his bank account?
They actually, the city actually borrowed money, it looks like on the balance sheets. The city has a liability to the pension plan of $58 million, and the pension plan has an asset from the city. Now, what they say they're doing, and I don't know why every city in the world wouldn't do this,
So they-
what they say they're doing is they're borrowing the contribution that the city owed to the pension plan, which they do,
Oh, so it
and
doesn't
they're
really
discounting
exist.
they're discounting it 1 year back, and they're calling it an asset. So that,
Okay, on that note, we'll come right back. Hello, welcome to Common Sense. This is a program where we try to make sense out of the policies that affect your life.
Join us this week and every week where we discuss the issues of the day with the people who know the details behind them. Policy experts, business leaders, town councilors, and state legislators. We catch you up on the news from a different perspective. We check in with Jeff Richard and hear what he's thinking about. And where we always are willing to ask, are you kidding me? So join us each week at Verizon Channel 34 or Cox 15, Saturdays at 4 p.m. and Sundays at 10 a.m. Be sure to like us on Facebook at Common Sense and follow us at Twitter at Common Sense RI. Brought to you by the Rhode Island Republican Party.
Okay, welcome back. I'm Representative Patricia Morgan, and our guest today is Mike Riley, who's been talking to us about pension plans in Rhode Island and about some of the real thorny, I think, alarming data or information that's out there about them. And we were just talking about Providence. Providence is reporting that they have $320 million.
360 million, I believe, was their last reported asset figure for the pension plan.
All right, so they're saying they have 360 million, but 60 million of that is not there,
It's not there.
and 30 million of it is a loan.
Yeah.
So they actually only have $270 million that are assets, things that we could see, cash, bonds, stocks,
Stuff they invest in.
stuff.
Yeah.
All right, so when they say they have 360, they're saying they're 31 or 32% funded.
Right, relative to the liability, which is also understated, but yes.
Right, okay, well, let's just start there.
Yeah.
But if you back out that 90 million that doesn't exist, they are
26%.
26% funded. And then if you say that 8.25%, assuming that you're going to make 8.25% is not reasonable, it should be the Warren Buffett 6%, they are
They're under 20% funded.
below 20% funded.
It might be the worst in the nation, somewhere near Chicago.
Detroit come to mind?
Well below Detroit ever was.
Really?
Yeah.
We're worse than Detroit?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, way worse. And Detroit.
Before the
Yeah, yeah. Because what Detroit did, and I pray we don't do this, but what Detroit did in 2004 or 5 was issue a pension obligation bond.
Oh, those are horrible.
Yeah, they can get you in trouble. Is basically what they do.
Woonsocket did that. Did you know that? They thought that that was a way to repair the pension.
Yeah.
They borrowed $20 million,
Yeah.
and then 2008 happened,
Yeah,
and they
that-
lost it all.
Yeah, and they spent like drunken sailors.
Well, they're still paying it off,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Right.
The money's gone.
All it does is embolden bad policy.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
but
you know
with
what?
interest-
As a financial advisor, I always tell people you never put money in investments
Right.
that you can't afford to lose.
right, exactly,
And there's no city out there that can afford to lose money.
right.
All right, now we have to invest in the stock market, in the pension plan,
Yeah.
but you don't borrow money to put in.
There's something called the prudent investor rule and the prudent man rule, and any fiduciary would follow those. And historically, for pension funds, like a city pension fund, that 60-40 is the name that comes to mind. So 40% is in fixed income and 60% is in an equity type product. Equities are the most aggressive investment you can get in without
That's right.
talking about derivatives, okay?
Right.
So, and some are even more aggressive, like equities in Malaysia might be more aggressive than buying GE in America.
That's right.
Right. So the characteristics of a pension fund should be prudent, right? They shouldn't get riskier and go
No.
full risk just because they have no money.
That's right. And yet, a lot of pension plans will reach for more stocks because historically stocks do better, but it puts them at risk.
Providence has the riskiest asset investment plan in the state.
They have a really risky mix. Now, again, certain amount has to be in cash, but what they
choose to invest on the equity side is risky, and the portion of equity is relative. First of all, they have
take on the risk to get more return.
11% of their hedge fund is in of their pension investment is in one hedge fund alone.
11%?
Yeah, it's in one hedge fund alone.
Oh.
And that hedge fund,
That's not good. That's
No,
not
that's
good
not good.
portfolio.
And
Yeah.
that hedge fund was picked by David Cicilline in 2006, and it's this advisor that was hired by Cianci that pushed it on them, and it's called Renaissance Tech. And
How has their performance been?
this is how they sold their performance. We can return 600 basis points more than the S&P 500 with 2/3 the risk. Now, you and I both know that's the holy grail. It just can't be done.
No.
But that's how Providence bought it. Okay,
All right, 600 basis points for the viewers is 6% more than the S&P returns.
Right. So if the S&P were to return 10, this particular fund
It's gonna
told
give you
Cicilline,
16 with
you're going
less
to get
risk?
16 with less risk. First of all, I would have thrown him out of the room laughing
Yeah.
because even a basic knowledge of numbers, you know that's not going to be
That's
true.
right.
But what kind of a big, and this is a very big hedge fund, would ever even say that to anyone? They must have had a comfort level with those people to be able to say, I don't know what was going on there. But Murphy York was on the commission. I mean, the whole thing, it just really bothered me. You know, when I was reading back in the notes, it's
Yeah.
really bad. So their actual performance has been somewhat, it might be right around the S&P 500.
Okay.
Well, but that's not good. That's not
No,
how they were
I
sold.
know. So is
And
it
their fees are high.
8.25%?
No, it wasn't 8.25%.
No. So they haven't been making the 8.25%.
The discount rate, as you know, is separate, but no, they haven't been making the 8.25%.
How much, if you look over the last 10 years, how much have they returned? Has it been pretty good?
The
or-
city of Providence?
Yeah.
It's in the sixes.
All right, so if they use 6
Yeah.
as their rate of return,
But yeah, I don't agree with the philosophy of using your rate of return when you're so deeply underfunded.
true.
And that's what Gatsby.
Because you have to make up for the fact that you're so underwater.
Okay, so Gatsby, without constraining the actuary to using what Gatsby says, has come up with a formula. If you're 100% funded, you've got the funding there, you can use your discount rate. You can use 8.25.
But they're so far from being.
But if you're 25% funded, you can only use your discount rate on that 25%. And then on the unfunded part, you use the 20-year municipal rate, which right now is 3.6.
So they're supposed, because,
And
and
that-
let's explain this to the folks.
All right.
All right, so they only have enough money to pay 20% of their obligation.
20. Yeah. Yeah.
20% of their
If we
obligation.
assume 6%, right?
Right,
Yeah.
if it's
So let's-
growing at 6%.
Yeah, let's give them their current numbers. It's 26%. That's
Which
how much
means
money.
there's this void of 80% of what they're on the hook for.
Yes. That should be discounted at some other
That
rate.
should be growing at 3.5% because you actually have to make up for that.
Yes.
You can't just say this little 20% is going to pay for the whole 100%.
Right. Right.
So you actually have to work at getting 30%, then 40%, then 60%, 80%, 100% in, which means you actually have to put more money in.
Okay, so every
Right?
city, yes, so every city and town in America follows GASB, Government Accounting Standards Board.
Board.
They have changed the rules because they were alarmed by how many cities and towns, especially underfunded ones, were using ridiculous discount rates. This applies directly to Providence. And this is called GASB 68. Starting this June, they will be required to report, not fund, report what the real liability is according to that formula.
And okay, let's just put this down to what liability really is. It's money,
You will, yeah,
right? A lot of money.
yeah.
And it's money that every person in Providence and in the state is on the hook for.
Yeah, now, so it depends on how that comes out. So I don't want to cast any wrong impressions here, but generally speaking, this comes out as property taxes. So really, the people who own property are the ones who are paying the taxes.
But, all right, so we already know that the property tax in Providence is very high,
Very high.
even though there are huge neighborhoods that have very poor people in them, right? I think the average household income is $28,000 or
The
something.
per capita income's 21.
21,000 in Providence. So because the residents are facing this huge property tax bill, they've also increased the commercial tax rate.
Yes.
Second highest in the country. You can't get businesses in here to give jobs to those people so they
Right.
make more than 21,000.
Right. It creates a constraint for creating more growth in Providence, which is what it ultimately needs, is growth of business, of profits, and then you get tax revenue off of profits.
Well, and you get more jobs
Yes,
so that
yeah.
people can get a higher
Yeah, that's the
standard of
goal.
living.
But they're in a situation now where they can't get there.
It just feels like a death spiral.
It is. And in Detroit, the next phase was, again, when the taxes go up, the house prices go down and everybody leaves.
Everybody leaves, yeah. Well, they can't afford the taxes, the houses deteriorate, or nobody wants to buy them. So
Gina Raimondo
tough.
did something interesting. She wants to tax over $1 million second homes.
Well, let's not go into that in this segment.
All right.
I really want to thank the viewers for listening to this. I'm not sure what the answer is here, but we need to find an answer quickly because Providence is in trouble, and when they're in trouble, so are all of us. So thank you for listening, and thank you so much for coming, Mike.
You're welcome. And people just don't do what Providence does.
Okay?
Now, there were two articles in the March 23rd Providence Journal that got my attention. They both involved a subject near and dear to all of us, that is, climate change. Well, it used to be global warming. Now, in the first article, it's reported that our new governor has filled 2 slots in the Rhode Island Executive Climate Change Coordinating Council Advisory Board, known henceforth as the RIECCCCAB. Now that one was created by the General Assembly in 2014 to, quote, oversee efforts to mitigate and adapt to climate change, unquote. In Rhode Island, of course. Now, since the folks appointed to the board mentioned in this article are not scientists that I recognized, I'll have to find out if anyone else on this board qualifies to get my serious attention. The second article, although it was really a letter to the editor, penned by no less than our Senator Reed and our Congressmen Langevin and Cicilline. They were moaning about the Providence Journal writing an article criticizing our very own climate senator Sheldon Whitehouse. They were unhappy about the criticism that the senator was receiving about his efforts to ferret out the bad guys criticizing his righteous efforts. Now, the March 24th Pro-Joe carried a comment, a written letter from Chip Knappenberger. Now, Chip is the assistant director of the Center for the Study of Science at the Cato Institute. He took aim at our good senator's efforts to put a tax on carbon, and a lot of other things in criticism of it, but that was the main thing. As the Washington Times said on the March 17th, it said, quote, politics and science can be a lethal combination, unquote. Seems our senator dispatched letters to 100 organizations to determine whether they are funding scientific studies designed to confuse the public. In other words, to disagree with them. And of course, they did that on stationery you paid for out of their senatorial franking privilege. No stamps. So Chip from Cato fought back by saying, quote, climate change doesn't call for strong-handed government-led tactics that may hamper our economy, risk the supply and reliability of our energy production, and dampen the pace of human betterment in developing countries around the world, unquote. Chip takes the senator to task for asserting that the climate science is, quote, settled science. I guess that means the debate should be over and we need to favorably endorse the, quote, preferred policy responses. Don't think so, Senator. How and why did Senator Whitehouse end up preaching in the Senate to a largely empty room on the subject of climate? Let's go back to the book of Climate Creation. You remember that book. That, of course, was written by that famous scientist Al Gore. You remember when Citizen Gore decided to shed light on the subject. He and others found that personal political value in shedding this light, and so it was done. They proclaimed the Earth was in a climactic death spiral. They predicted the polar ice cap would be gone by now. You remember the picture of the lonely polar bears, soon to be extinct? So what has happened since Vice President Gore predicted the sky was falling? Now we know, for one thing, that this year the polar ice cap expanded for the second year in a row. It is now an area twice the size of Alaska. Now that area was open water 2 years ago. The bear population seems to have grown from fewer than 700 in 2011 to over 1,000 today in the areas that we can even find a way to track bears. Oh well. What about the other end of the planet? Antarctica gained 7.6 million square miles of sea ice this summer. This southern winter. Summer down there. For 3 years in a row, Antarctica's sea ice has increased to record-breaking size. So the climate debate continues. I really don't get it. Who's right? Should I believe those Senator Whitehouse calls deniers? Or the political truthers? I wonder if there might be multiple reasons for the changes in the Earth's climate besides carbon. But I'm not a climate scientist yet. Let's look at how well the truthers are doing. Let's start with credibility. Now, we live in the smallest state in the Union, with a little over 1 million of us. Yet we are entitled to the same number of senators as Texas, which has 26 plus million citizens. Now, that would be 2 senators. It should be easier to talk to and thus represent the interests of a mere 1 million. Now, we have 2 Democrat senators and 2 Democrat representatives. And you know that after the next census, it's very possible we could be down to 1 representative because we're going to lose population. Instead of moving out, we need movers to come in. It is true that all we have in Congress right now are Rhode Island Democrats. They work in a Republican world. So who is listening to them? Senator Whitehouse's passion for climate, you would think he would be on the Senate Commerce Committee, which has the subcommittee on oceans. That's what they look at. Oh, he didn't get appointed, I guess. But he did start a new caucus in the Senate. In 2011, he helped start the Senate Oceans Caucus. Almost all Democrats on it. So we have a new unofficial caucus, because there's only 1 official one. But I can't find the evidence that they have met the 4 times a year their charter said that they would. I wonder how effective they really are. So on one side of the climate debate, we have those who would restrict the use of fossil fuel, pitted against those that declare we need more carbon. Now, one of the scientists in this debate, his name is Patrick Moore. He once started the Greenpeace thing. He was an activist. Now he's a reformed environmental activist, anti-Greenpeace. Dr. Moore is on the speaker circuit with charts and tables making his case. He claims, quote, "We have no proof increased carbon dioxide is responsible for the Earth's slight warming over the last 300 years. There has been no significant warming for 18 years, while we have emitted 25% of all the carbon dioxide ever emitted." Now, carbon dioxide, of course, is vital for life on Earth, and the plants would like more of it, unquote. I like this one too. He wrote, quote, "Environmentalists spread fear and raise donations. Politicians appear to be saving the Earth from doom. The media has a field day with sensation and conflict. Science institutions raise billions in grants, create whole new departments, and stoke a feeding frenzy of scary scenarios. Business wants to look green and get huge subsidies for projects that would otherwise be economic losers, such as wind farms, sound right, solar arrays." Wow. Now that sure is an optimistic perspective, Doctor. I'll tell you what I would like Senator Whitehouse and the other members of the Rhode Island delegation to do with their time. Pay attention to identifying what's going wrong here in Rhode Island and start finding ways to reverse it. You guys work for me. Get to it. Thank you and God bless.